All right, really happy to have Christian Watson back on the channel. Christian, in case people are unaware, you have been on the channel before. You are a college student in my first television news market of Macon, Georgia, majoring in philosophy, minoring in journalism, which is why I wanted to have you back on the channel to talk about what happened with Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot. You actually did a video about this yourself, which I will show a clip of in a second. But the first thing we should do, let's just go to this quick article here. This is from USA Today. Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot. I'm only granting one-on-one interviews to journalists of color. And from what I understand, it sounds like she's marking the 2-year anniversary of her inauguration. And so the interviews she's going to grant solely to journalists of color because she says she has been struck by the overwhelmingly white press corps in Chicago. So there's been a lot of reaction to this. We've seen some people support it, some people very upset about it. We saw Tulsi Gabbard say that she's an anti-white racist by saying this, or that is anti-white racism. And you had a different take on your channel, which, like I said, I want to play a snippet of. But can I just get your initial reaction when you first heard about this? You're somebody who wants to go into this world of I don't know, what do you want to call it? Like commentary, like social political commentary, and you've got a minor in journalism, so you're studying the world of journalism with today's insanity as the background. So just initial thoughts.
Well, when I first saw this come across my screen, without any context or any details, I immediately thought, okay, maybe she's trying to show that she is in support of what someone left would term diversity and inclusion. That was just my initial thoughts. Then I actually read the story and I began understanding the context to everything. And I realized that Lori Lightfoot is doing a little bit more than just that. I think that Lori Lightfoot is engaging in a practice that itself has no effective use in the public sphere because that practice doesn't understand where it originates from. And this is the practice of equity. And I think, or at least equity as people of her ideology would describe it, because she simply said there's overwhelming maleness and whiteness. And that overwhelming maleness and whiteness is a disgrace in a city which a lot of people identify as a minority group. That was her reasoning. But the problem is she doesn't really consider exactly why people in Chicago who may be minorities may not want to get into journalism. She doesn't consider the difference of interest and the diversion of tastes that go into creating a profession. She doesn't consider any of that. She simply looks at things from her office and says, you know what, the world should be like this way, and if it's not like this way, there's something wrong. So those were my initial thoughts, and I kind of expand on that as I go into my commentary. But I ultimately think that it's the use of an ineffective mechanism, and perhaps even a short-sighted mechanism, to create a condition that she has not justified creating in the first place.
So one interesting pushback, I think, is that some reporters were questioning whether this was more of a move to bar people who may be critical of her administration. And I think that's a fair question to ask politicians when they veil a decision, for instance, in sort of whatever would be something they would think the public would be popular, like some of the sort of ideology, I guess, that's sort of would be pervasively popular with, I don't know, even your young generation of journalism, like it, you know, make it sound good on the surface, but does it really serve a selfish purpose? Okay, so I saw that, which I thought was interesting. Like, is this just she's assuming that if she gets certain people only interviewing her on her anniversary, you're not going to get maybe some tougher questions? Then the pushback to that was, well, wait, you're saying people of color can't ask tough questions? What's wrong with you? And so then I saw that sort of debate going back and forth. This is just reading this USA Today article, I should say. Like right here, for instance, with this outrage, y'all are implying that Black and brown journalists aren't capable of asking the hard questions. Tribe tweeted Wednesday saying it got an interview the same day. I was trying to put myself in the position of, okay, like if you were somebody who either supports this or you're somebody who's, you know, not necessarily trying to jump on the emotionally reactive bandwagon, like the immediate, like we're all trained, I think, kind of like lab rats, right? To hear something and then just go down this path without stopping back and thinking, okay, what's really going on here? my brain goes to, I'm not quite sure if this is really that different in content. It may be an escalation, I guess, or an elevation, but it doesn't seem to be necessarily that different in the very substance of it than what a lot of corporate journalism newsrooms are even going through with training right now. I mean, they're sort of being trained to, I think in this kind of manner, even though there were journalists that were like, well, wait a second, we're not going to submit to politicians deciding who gets to interview them for any reason. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't know if I see it as that different from some of like the equity training like you were discussing. I don't know if I see it as that different from the very training that many journalists are going through themselves right now in their own newsrooms.
So, and interesting you mentioned that. So is it different from any of the equity or social justice stuff that's going on in newsrooms? Of course not. In fact, it's a byproduct of it, in fact. Because the Chicago Press Corps, at least a few people who are veterans in it actually came out after this decision and said, you know what, I've been working in the press corps for 50 years, and I think that Lori Lightfoot is doing a courageous act because there is just so much of a lack of diversity here, and things need to be changed. So that is an overwhelming sense among the journalistic community. I'm sure there are some individuals, primarily on the right, like me, who will scorn it and who will sniff at it, but there are other individuals who think that it's a long time coming. Now, the thing is, familiarity creates complacency. A lot of times people will say, okay, because this has happened for a certain amount of time and throughout history, it must be something that should be somewhat acceptable. But of course, the problem with this is things that occur are not morally acceptable simply because they occur. We have to examine, why do they occur? So why is this occurring? And this gets back to the question, okay, is Lori Lightfoot trying to get easier interviews? I don't think that's it. In fact, I think that people who claim that are actually doing a significant disservice to understanding the ideology for which Lori Lightfoot is an emissary. People do not understand that Lori Lightfoot genuinely probably sees a harm being done in the way of lack of representation, and she genuinely sees that a certain section of society, such as the journalistic press corps, should reflect all of society simply by their skin color or by their gender. I believe that she genuinely sees that. And so if we can accept that and move past the sort of cynicism, is she doing this to get easier interviews or whatever? Because if she wanted to just do that, she could just say, okay, I will only grant interviews to left of center news publications, because many of them love her. So if we can get past the cynicism, the narrow-minded cynicism for a moment, we can actually see that she's doing this from a place of genuineness. We can see the sort of effects, the impacts that a reckless egalitarianism has when it's put to place in political structures, right? She wants to increase the diversity of the journalistic press corps, because apparently that'll make the journalistic press corps better simply by having people without any regard to anything else other than them of different color in the press corps. That's a kind of egalitarianism that believes that quantity itself, how much that someone has, is what makes them live a good life. But of course, we understand that's a dangerous myth. Just because you have a lot of something does not mean that something is actually good. We have to understand where that quantity comes from. And Lori Lightfoot obviously doesn't even want to ask that question. She simply wants to have it and then to pretend like everything is hunky-dory. So, no, we have to actually confront the reason why she's doing this. And it seems evident to me, prima facie, that she's doing this because she genuinely sees a harm and a wrong in a field that she interacts with on a daily basis.
I see that this is as a logical endpoint for where this goes, which is, again, why I bring up these trainings that a lot of journalists are going through right now. They may actually support the training they're going through and think it's great. A lot of these newsrooms are doing this thinking that this is the righteous thing to do, training their journalists in exactly what she's talking about. So they may, on one hand, sit through these trainings and think this is great, and then they rail against her for what I think seems to be a logical extension of exactly what they're talking about, almost as if they're the ones that are missing that logical place. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And to answer your contention, Allison, it's a good one, and it's one of origin. Where does the criticism of this come from? And now perhaps you have more information than I do, because I've looked at the Chicago Press Corps specifically, and I know that a lot of people there are fine with this. I'm not sure how many other journalists, I would hope there'd be many, although I'm not optimistic, would be radically against this proposal. Because I think that, again, as you mentioned, a lot of journalists have been conditioned into the state of mind that quantity is king, and the conditions of the quantity, or the history of the quantity, or the foundation of the quantity means nothing if we can simply assure that quantity exists for people who have supposedly not had quantity for a very long time in their lives. So yes, I think that it would be it would exemplify a bout of helpful amnesia, I guess, for people who have been indoctrinated under that system to be outraged by this. But I'm not sure how many journalists are outraged by this, at least how many centrist or left of center journalists are outraged by this. I'm not sure entirely.
Okay, let's play this quick clip from your video, and this would be a good point to tell everyone that in the description of this video, there is a link to your channel on YouTube. I'm trying to get you on Locals as well, where a lot of us
Absolutely.
are having fun with our communities and without fear of being blocked and booted off. I don't know. I think I told you, Christian, that on a couple days ago, YouTube removed one of my videos, and then subsequently, after I appealed, basically sent me the whoopsie email and was like, "Oh, okay, actually, it doesn't violate our terms of service, and so now you're allowed back." So
it's happened to me before.
So anyway, go to Christian's YouTube channel, check him out there. As soon as he's somewhere else, I will let everybody know. Also, I'll put anything else we're using in this. I'll put the links to those in the description, but also just so everybody knows, my other platforms are also in the description. And definitely, even if you're watching this on YouTube, it's worth just keeping tabs on those of us you're following on YouTube somewhere else, because I will say, having learned my lesson the hard way a couple days ago, I couldn't even get into my YouTube studio for a little bit. So it was very hard for me to even tell people what was going on or what was going to happen. So if you want to keep to tabs on people talking about things, that it's not just candy canes and butterflies and whatnot, definitely check out the other platforms. Okay, so let's see what Christian has to say here real fast.
Wait, quick story.
Oh, go ahead, Christian.
Quick story. So I made a video about COVID-19 about 9 months ago for one of my podcasts, and I was basically speaking about how humanity, through our inquisitive wit and our knack for scientific understanding, was progressing past the virus faster than the virus was progressing in our own society, and that we should not fear COVID as much as. And that video actually got flagged. Someone reported it because they didn't like it. Now, I got back like a few months ago, like way after it was published. And YouTube sent a notice to me saying, well, you shouldn't be denying COVID. So I wrote an email back. I'm like, dude, this is a philosophical takedown of the fear around COVID. This is not denying COVID. They're like, actually, they didn't even respond to me. They removed the strike from my account and put the video back up. They didn't even respond to me. So
it's almost like, I wonder if their tactic is to just scare you and see if you'll respond, because I have seen some people go through that and then they will do a new video that says, "I'm sorry, YouTube, I didn't mean it. Thanks for letting me back on," and basically identifying with the oppressor in that sense. And then they're just like, "I'll just do whatever you say from here on out." It's almost just like, I feel like it's a little bit of a psychological war tactic where they just try to shock you a little bit back into line and hope that you'll learn your lesson and quiet down.
Oh yeah.
I will say one thing I'm starting to do more so than I did before is I'm self-demonetizing, depending on the video. If it's controversial, related specifically to COVID, I've noticed that if I don't monetize it, it's more likely to stay up, and that for whatever reason, the ads, they're more likely to flag it. At least that's just been my experience. So, again, just another reason for people watching to support creators directly, like Christian, who is a college student and is going to take the world by storm through many of his videos. This is not the only one, but let's play real fast.
I want to focus on the philosophical basis for Lightfoot's decisions. Because let's be honest about something. You can look at something like Guybrush did and call it racist and have absolutely no effect on how someone else's mind perceives the issue, or no effect on the intellectual advancement of that issue. What do I mean? If I have a certain idea of racism and a critical race theory person has a certain idea of racism, and both of them have the same name, racism, but are different, If I say that's racist to them, they will say no, because you're operating from a false idea of racism, and vice versa. So I find it very dismissive and anti-intellectual when people say, well, critical race theory is racist. Okay, great, it's racist. But what the hell does that mean insofar as the intellectual advancement of the contentions against critical race theory? It means absolutely nothing.
Okay. Getting fired up, Christian. I'm liking it. I'm liking the new and improved Christian. He is he's letting it rip. All right. So what do you mean by all of this? Walk us through it.
Yeah. So a lot of people, well, and I think even rightly say, critical race theory is a racist ideology because it uses someone's immutable characteristics, their complexion, as a basis for their value. That's all racism is. It is using someone's complexion as a basis for a value judgment, negative or positive. That's all racism really is. And if you want my honest opinion, what critical race theory does is it takes racism and it takes it from the personal and makes it the public, makes it part of systems, makes it part of power, which really redefines the entire dynamics around racism in the first place. But a lot of folks, because they're operating from the correct idea of what racism is, will say, this is racist. And that may be true, but the problem is that's not effective. And this is a pretty important philosophical question. If the truth is not effective, do you say it? Well, sure, you can say it, but it has to be backed up by something else that can make it effective. Because effectiveness is not simply weighed by if what you're saying is true. Effectiveness is also weighed by how you are saying it. So you can say that critical race theory is a prejudice ideology without actually saying, in a very short way, it's racist. So it's basically more of an argumentation tactic that I want people to adopt, because if they want to actually change hearts and minds and not just speak to the crier, they're going to have to actually explain why critical race theory is an inferior way of understanding the world and understanding the human beings that inhabit it.
Okay, so walk us through then what you should do before I let you go. I know you got to run, but if that's not the way to go, what are your thoughts on when you're arguing against this decision, or you're criticizing it? Where do you go with it instead of using the term racist?
So I do a few things. I explain how critical race theory's scope and grasp on reality is very narrow and limited to a certain set of definitions that are not reflected by everything else in the world. It would kind of be like saying, well, I garden plants, and all the world is about gardening plants because I garden plants. It's sort of circular idea. And critical race theory says, well, racism has shaped America because there was a point in American history where there was slavery, and therefore everyone partakes in racism that shapes America. That's the basic intention of critical race theory. So just explain how that statement right there is just very narrow. That's number one. And number two, about how trying to analyze institutions requires much more than, again, a single answer for everything, because critical race theory is ostensibly billed as an idea to analyze how institutions affect and impact the lives of people in America who have been traditionally oppressed. Okay, well, that opens us up to a range of questions. I mean, what institutions, number one? Number two, are the institutions themselves have no power without people. So what people were in the institutions? Number three, how exactly have these things manifested and how they manifest right now? You just keep asking questions. And if you keep asking questions, you're going to get to a point where specifics are neglected for generalities. That's how these ideologies work. A critical race theory is a very grossly simplistic ideology. It uses generalities and macro concepts to reject the very specific and individual details of natural life. That's why it's so successful, because they don't have to appeal to your individuality. They don't have to appeal to a particular circumstance. They can just appeal to generalities. So, very shortly, explain why critical race theory is narrow in its understanding of the world. Ask questions, especially about institutions and the relationship between people and institutions, and try to see, are the institutions bad, or are some people who have inhabited them bad? And then, number three, always remember that your opponent, so most of the time, is probably operating from a different definitional playground than you are. Understand that, respect that, and make your case as to why your definition is superior to theirs. That's how we can beat critical race theory in 3 simple steps. And we should clip that.
I'll send it to you. You can upload it as your YouTube short.